Okay, I'm still trying to figure out the changes in this system. There used to be a button on the YouTube channel to say go live, and it seems as soon as the OBS software connects, it goes live automatically. So here we are, but we're working, so thank God for that. Hi, this is Gene Keener with SYMF Yeshua Messianic Fellowship. We are just a little bit before 6 o'clock on Wednesday, so I'm kind of vamping a little bit until give some people a chance to connect and get on. So in the meantime, this is our study in book of Galatians. We are in our next to last section of Galatians chapter 3. We'll finish it up next week, God willing. We have nothing but excitement, thrills, and chills for today's study. Okay, that might be overstating. Anyways, you can find us online at our website, simchatyeshua.org. That's simchatyeshua.org. We are a Messianic Jewish congregation, and you can check us out on our website. We also have a Facebook page, Simchat Yeshua, and you can reach us there as well. Since this is a YouTube channel, we are, of course, subject to the algorithms and search engines for Messianic Jewish services or Bible studies. So please give us a subscribe, a like, tell others about this channel, and hit the little bell for notifications so you'll be notified when the live chat goes live. Also, don't be afraid to type in your name and say hello in the chat window so I can keep track of who's who. I like to talk to people directly if I can. And sadly, this method is pretty much one way right now. So I get to talk and you get to listen. It's a very Soviet style kind of a thing. But we're still kind of new with the technology, still trying to figure things out, and it doesn't always work as it should. So anyways, make a short story long. Don't be afraid to ask questions or make comments, or even I even do rebukes if you want to do that. It's pretty much open for discussion. So if you want to put your name in the hello box, the chat box, and then I can keep track of who's here, just so I can say hello to you at least. And we'll move on from there. It's a couple minutes after 6. I'm going to vamp for another minute or two to give people a chance to come on, then we'll get started. Okay? We are a Messianic Jewish congregation in California, and you can find information about us on the website if you want to chase that down. We are currently not meeting at our normal location and time, trying to get that changed, trying to get that because we rent space at a church and they've been very cautious about opening up when the governor hates us enough to not to tell us that, of all things, that we shouldn't be singing because we're sitting down when we're singing. I don't know how that works, but somehow in being a musician with a performance minor in voice, I find it kind of hard to understand how sitting down is the deadly part of singing. Anyways, that's was one of the explanations that was given for why we shouldn't be singing in our congregations. However, we have been we've actually started meeting at a house for Shabbat. So anyways, got any questions about that, you can give us a ring. But at this point, it's still pretty low key and quiet. Um, just because the place where we're renting space is themselves not meeting fully and completely. And I don't necessarily blame them. The large congregations that have plenty of financial backing to where they can, sue the state and challenge the governor's tyranny. Um, we don't have that, and the place where we normally would meet doesn't have that. So I can kind of understand why they're playing cautious at this point, even though it's clearly a horrible violation of our rights. Um, Nonetheless, that's what we've got. Okay, let me get over here and set ourselves up for our portion for the day. Get things set up. Okay, so verse 21 is where we're starting. I know I looked at this. I just have to remind myself what I'm doing. All right. Okay, we're almost there. Yeah, it's 5 after. Let's go ahead and get started. Um, quick quick overview. The book of Galatians was not written to a single congregation, but to a region, a Roman province called Galatia, which is in the area of current northern side of modern Turkey, north central area. Um, the uh, the, uh, the term Galatian has to do with the language of the people. These were actually Celts, primarily Celtic people. Yeah, Celts. Um, who had immigrated from Central Europe into this area of this region. Then is called Galatia after their language. An early form of the Gaelic language is why it's called Galatia. Um, and eventually, this group of people migrated north and west through Europe and eventually ended up in England and Ireland and Scotland. Um, and over the years, they of course migrated to the United States and started playing basketball in Massachusetts. So that's kind of the history of the people. Um, so the Celtic people were there in that area, and so the region was called Galatia after their language. Um, so um, what happened was Shaul, Rabbi Shaul, or Paul the Apostle, depending on how you want to call him, had traveled up to that region, encountered some issues, and there was a big problem going on. And this is the purpose for the letter, that there are people that came up from Jerusalem claiming to be from the Messianic community. In the text, it said that claims that they're of James or from James. James was the head of the congregation at the time, the main congregation in Jerusalem. So they claimed that you cannot be a member of the family of God unless you do a conversion to Pharisaism. And Paul's whole argument to the Galatian community, the Galatian region, is you already have all the things you need to be the family. Okay? And we're going to conclude chapter 3 next week with that famous line that if you are in Messiah, you are Abraham's seed, meaning you're already part of the family. And Paul had already acknowledged that you have the Spirit of God in you, all these Gentiles in Galatia. Miracles are happening around, which means you have God's favor, God's blessing to exist as Gentiles. So how can you make a conversion to Pharisaism and somehow improve your standing before God? It doesn't work. It doesn't happen. You can't improve on what God's already working on with you and through you. Okay. Part of the controversy is because of the way that Paul wrote this book. A lot of people have come by later and basically flipped what he says to make it read like it's opposite. Paul never spoke against God's commandments. And this is one of the big arguing points that goes on with Galatians, because the way Paul writes, he's very much against Pharisaism. And it doesn't help us any that he uses the same word in Greek, nomos, some version of it, to represent both God's commandments that we define as Torah or Tanakh in Hebrew. The whole of the Bible, or the first 5 books, is Torah, as a indicator of all of God's instructions. And he uses that same word nomos, or some version of it, to also talk about the Pharisees' rules. And so there's confusion in the text if you don't understand the context. Now, one of the things that works against this is Paul had already been there. He already had those arguments with the congregations in the area. And so when he's writing his letter, all he's doing is hinting on the stuff that the people already know. So rather than going through the full explanation all over again, he just hints at things. And so you read a phrase, works of the law, in Galatians, and that's more specifically a reference to the Pharisees' rules. I'm careful to not use the word law when it comes to Phariseeism or even modern Orthodox Judaism, because it creates confusions with God's written commandments, okay, in the Torah or in the Tanakh. So I try to avoid the confusion by talking about the Pharisee rules rather than as opposite to God's commandments or his law. And so that'll help try to clarify some of the issues. And so you have in the 3rd chapter of Galatians a lot of heavy lifting as far as the theology of what's the problem. And the main problem is, if you give your word that you're going to follow all the rules of Pharisaism, and this applies to modern Orthodox as well. If you give your say-so that you're going to follow all this, guess what? According to Torah, you are obligated to do your word, even though it hurts you in the long run and in the short term even, and all throughout. It hurts you to make that conversion to Pharisaism or to Orthodox. Nonetheless, God expects you to keep your word because you've promised. Now, what is this whole thing about circumcision? Okay, I'm front-loading all the arguments today. What's not mentioned in the letter, but what everybody knew at the time, is that the circumcision was the last act of making the full conversion to Pharisaism. It's also the last act to becoming converting to Orthodox in modern times. You convince the local congregation that you want to become a Jew, become part of the congregation, and eventually, you'll go through classes, learn all the stuff you need to learn. You'll go before a bet din to be judged whether or not you can be allowed to become a member of the congregation or part of the Jewish community. And if you're accepted, among the last things you do is you do a mikveh, a tevilah, that you do the immersion. You go down a Gentile, you come up a Jew. And then immediately after that, within 8 days, you must be circumcised, because as a new creation, you must, as a new person, a new being, for males, the commandment is circumcised within 8 days. Commandment says 8 on the 8th day, but within the tradition, it's within those first 8 days you do the circumcision. And that last act, that circumcision, it finalizes the whole process of becoming a new creation, no longer a Gentile, but now a Jew, no longer outside of God's covenant, but within God's covenant. And so the circumcision becomes the token of the whole argument, and that's what's going on. Paul could not be an apostle of Messiah and tell people to disregard God's commandments. That's an absolute, right? Because Yeshua said he came not to destroy the law and the prophets, but to fulfill. Okay, I don't care how you define fulfill. If it negates or lessens the first part of that statement, he came not to destroy, then your interpretation is faulty. So Messiah came to confirm everything about God's written commandments is true and proper to do. Um, Now, okay, so Paul's argument about being against circumcision then cannot be the biblical commandment of circumcision. What other circumcision is out there? It's not written in the text because everybody knew what he was talking about. He's talking about the conversion, the circumcision which finalizes your conversion to becoming a Pharisee. Okay, so I think that's enough general explanation. I've been doing this pretty much every study we do, just because we need to do this. It's my desire, and for me, it's greatly an important thing that we learn to win the arguments. We learn um, to deal with the issues and the questions and the misteaching. And so I want very much for you guys to learn to win the arguments. And so if I sound pedantic, if I keep going over the same stuff over and over again, I do want to pound this into everybody's consciousness that, you know, there is a way to answer all the misstatements and misdirections that people try to drag out of the letter to the Galatians that shouldn't be done. Okay? And start with the premise that Paul could not be an apostle and deny the commandment of God in the same breath, or at the same in any particular writing or speech of his. Okay, so his statement against circumcision has nothing to do with the biblical commandment. It has everything to do with the tradition of the circumcision to complete the conversion process. Okay, let's take a little running start. Um, Okay, and I think I did it again. I lost my place. Hold on a second. Okay, yeah, we're actually starting in verse 21. So let me take a little running start of verse 19. If you want to catch up, we do have these studies posted, and um, you can catch up on all the studies. They're still kind of rough. They haven't been, the dead time at the beginning and the end haven't been chopped off. And so we haven't really gone through and prettied them up to where they're really nice and neat. But the raw the raw broadcast is there, so enjoy it. Okay, verse 19, chapter 3. What purpose then does the law serve? It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come, of to whom the promise was made, and it was appointed through angels by the hand of a mediator. Now, a mediator does not mediate for one only, but God is one. And we talked about that last week. And if you want to understand that better, go get last week's study, because otherwise I'll be here for another hour going over just those two verses. Okay, we're really going to speed up this time. We're going to do 4 verses today. All right, starting in verse 21. Is the law then against the promises of God? Certainly not. For if there had been a law given which could have given life, truly righteousness could have been by the law. But the Scripture has confined all under sin, that the promise by faith in Jesus Christ might be given to those who believe. But before faith came, we were kept under guard by the law, kept for the faith which would afterward be revealed. Therefore, the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor. Okay, that's our text for the day. And let me get my actual study up here. There's some pretty contentious statements in this, and we're going to go cover all these at this point. Okay, we have a commentary to start off with. The law was the pedagogue. It leads us to Messiah. It identifies him and his righteousness. It guarded us. Now that we know and trust Messiah, we no longer need to be led to Messiah. Those arguing that there was still a need for ritual conversion were silenced. Through Messiah, you've already been grafted in, so you don't need a pedagogue to take you there. Note, this is not saying the Torah is annulled. That would be absurd. How could the thing which identifies Messiah and declares his righteousness be invalidated? It continues to lead others to Messiah. And that's, in a nutshell, that's the argument. Okay? Um, so if you want, you can just sort of sit back and relax. Okay, Barbara and Vince, hello, shalom. How you doing, Vince? Um, Glad to hear you're back at work, and may your recovery be quick and complete. And also you, Barbara, didn't you hurt your foot also? We have kind of a hospital ward going on here. All right, um, let me get back to our text here. Verse 21. Is the law then against the promises of God? Certainly not. For if there had been a law given which could have given life, truly righteousness would have been by the law. The law then, this is Englishman's Greek New Testament. The law then, is it against the promises of God? May it not be. For if was given a law which was able to quicken, indeed by law would have been righteousness. Okay, that's I like the Englishman's Greek New Testament for one primary reason is I'm completely a wreck when it comes to deciphering Greek. I really need a lot of help with it, and I consult a lot of sources to try to make sure I understand what's going on. And I like Englishman's Greek New Testament because in the main text, it gives as word for word as much as possible, at least it seems to me, what it says. And so the syntax is odd because it's Greek syntax. And if you if you like sci-fi, you'll notice that the syntax sounds like that's a character by the name of Yoda is speaking, because I think they borrowed a lot of Yoda's syntax from Greek. So anyways, that's my sci-fi 2 cents. Okay. Okay, another case where law, Torah, and law, Pharisaism, are used in the same sentence. Is the Torah then against the promises of God? Certainly not, for if there had been a Pharisaic rule given which could have given life, truly righteousness would have been by the Pharisaic rules. Okay, that's my interpretation. That's sort of what I'm trying to get at. That the commandments of God are not against the promises of God. They cannot be at odds. Okay. And what is this whole chapter is focused on what is the promise of God that's central to this letter, which is that all, even through Abraham, all the nations of the world will be blessed. Shaul, Paul makes the argument that the giving of the Spirit to the Gentiles for trusting in what God has done is that blessing to all the nations of the world, giving us the Spirit of God, giving us a place with God, being part of the family of God, having full access to God without having to become a Pharisee or make a conversion to being Jewish, which are the two big draws going on, one then and one now. Mainly because they make the argument, oh no, you can't be fully part of God's family until you make this conversion. And I hate to say it, but people get sucked into that every day, and it's a very emotional argument, which is why it has some power. But the problem is, it's wrong. It's a wrong argument, and Paul makes the argument that if you obligate yourself to become a Pharisee, you obligate yourself to everything they tell you to do, and that puts you then at odds with the grace of God. For as a Gentile, you are not required to make conversion to anything. Okay, and so you're required to make conversion to anything. There is an expectation, and this is where the argument breaks down. All the discussion breaks down, because we do have an instruction in Acts chapter 15, around verse 21. Where there is an expectation that Gentiles are going to be focused or pointed to the local synagogue whereby they learn the commandments of God, that is, that Moses has taught every Sabbath in every synagogue. Okay? Um, and so it's an expectation that once you become a believer, you are born again, you are saved. There's an expectation you're going to learn the lifestyle. Learning the lifestyle is not you're producing your salvation, but learning the lifestyle of holiness is a result of your salvation. You follow the difference. It's a big difference, and we need to master that argument. We don't follow the commandments to get saved, but we follow the commandments because we're saved and we identify with God and His ways. Okay? So, obvious rhetorical question: does the law of God produce death? And here's a couple of arguments against that. One is Deuteronomy 30. See, I've set before you today life and good, death and evil. In that I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in His ways, to keep His commandments, His statutes, and His judgments, that you may live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land which you go to possess. Okay, same idea a little bit later. Deuteronomy 32, verse 45. Moses finished speaking all these words to all Israel. And he said to them, set your hearts on all the words which I testify among you today, which you shall command your children to be careful to observe. All the words of this law, for it is not a futile thing for you, because it is your life, and by this word you shall prolong your days in the land which you cross over the Jordan to possess. I just realized I messed up with something here. And, okay. Never mind, I'll get it later. Okay. Jewish teachers said that life did come by the law, both in this world and in the world to come. But Paul here concludes his argument in our section just before this, that the law was never meant to do the work of the promise. Okay, that was last week's study. So, Paul, so go check out last week's study, and you'll hear the full discussion. The work that was required for Gentiles was to believe that God had sent His Son, who made a sacrifice for Himself in an accursed fashion, that that our sins will be judged through that sacrifice, and that we will have a place of forgiveness and cleanness and family if we but ask for that sacrifice to count for us. This is Isaiah 53:10. I keep coming back to that because that is actually the core of the gospel in the Tanakh, in the whole of what's classically but incorrectly called the Old Testament. Okay, because it's a tough translation, because there's a ton of pronouns, and you really have to carefully go through to figure it all out. But the quick translation is, if you look upon the sacrifice of Yeshua and you tell God you want that sacrifice to count for you, God will make it count for you, and it will count for your redemption. Okay? And so, that's the good news. That's the good news right there. Okay. All right, let's move on. Certainly not. Okay. I better back up and read that because I just lost my brain. Is the law then against the promises of God? Certainly not. Okay, thank you. I remind myself now. Certainly not. Okay. Greek me genoito, no or not to become, so may it not come into existence, may it not begin to be, or may it not receive being. The same phrase used in the same context is found in a bunch of places in Romans. May not be. If law, Torah, could save, it would have. Law is not, and never will be the method of salvation, bringing someone into the family of God. Okay? So may it never be, may it not be, okay, that it would be even tried to apply that way. Okay? And remember, salvation came before instruction. We were rescued from Egypt before we were taken to Mount Sinai. There's a reason for that. God did not come to Moses and say, here's all these 10 commandments and a whole bunch of other stuff to be written down. And you're going to take that to Egypt and teach Israel. And when they live it perfectly, I'll get you out of Egypt. I'll rescue you from Egypt from there. Is that what he said? Was that the deal? No. No, the invitation was come out of Egypt, and be his people. And it wasn't until, later, almost 2 months later, that you received God's commandments, that we received God's commandments. In other words, now that you're saved, now that you're rescued, now that you're redeemed, here's how you should live. This is how we should approach God's commandments. It is not some onerous thing that God's pounding on us that we don't get to have any fun in this world. There's plenty of joy and fun in walking in God's ways. But it is upon us to learn his ways now that we are redeemed. Okay, it's not the point of our salvation, but our love for God and our willingness to follow his ways and set our ways aside is a sign, not the sign, but a sign of our redemption, our being redeemed. Okay? So, again, that's how you want to couch your argument. I want you to win the argument. So this is why I keep pounding on certain ideas over and over. Okay, verse 22. But the scripture has confined all under sin, that the promise by faith in Jesus Christ might be given to those who believe. Okay. Again, Englishman's Greek. But shut up the scripture, all things under sin, that the promise of faith by Jesus Christ might be given to those that believe. Okay. There's another translation put out by Hope of Israel Ministry. But the scriptures caused all to be under sin, that the promise of trust Jesus Christ is giving, they are thinking to be true. Okay? And this matches well with the idea of Isaiah 53:6. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him, Messiah, the iniquity of us all. Okay, in other words, we've all messed up. We've all blown it. We've all done the wrong thing. Okay, but all that hostility for that sin was placed on Yeshua, and he took that gladly in our place. So now that the punishment, the penalty for that sin has been paid, we're in a condition of being reconcilable to God. Okay, and so you have this open invitation to reconcile. Hence verse 10 in chapter 53. Okay, so it was confined. Okay, the scripture has confined all under sin. In other words, it explained us to Syneclason. I hope you guys are having a good laugh at my pronunciation. To shut up together, to enclose of a shoal of fishes and a net, or as a description. In other words, no escape from sin. We are all stuck in it. Okay. Please note, this is not the only function of the law, but the point we cannot earn our redemption with God by Torah observance is the point of this statement. Very important, very, very important statement to understand. Okay. A lot of people teach that the function of the law is only to convince us of our sin. There's if you want to talk about general directions of God's commandments, there are two. Okay. One direction is to show us the righteous way. We have God's commandments to tell us what is the right thing to do, what is the right way to live. We need to learn that. We need to be comfortable with that, and we need to live that. Okay? The good function of the law is to teach us what is right. The bad function of the law is to remind us when we do wrong. Okay? And to explain to us what we do wrong. Or what it is that we do that's wrong. So there's two functions there. Do the right thing and what to avoid for the wrong thing. Okay? So it's not only only. And some people teach it that way, and that's incorrect. Some people teach that the purpose of the law was only to tell us that we're sinners. No, the purpose of the law is also to tell us how to do things the right way so we're not sinning. Okay? Shaul, Paul, is not against Torah, but the positive benefits of obeying God's commandments are not on topic for now. In other words, this wasn't the discussion. The joy and the benefits of keeping the commandments of God was not the subject of this discussion while he's writing this chapter 3. So it doesn't come up in the discussion. And because it doesn't come up in the statement here, people think, well, obviously this is the only function of the law because that's the only thing Paul mentions. No, there's more to it. It's just that he didn't mention the other half of it here. The governing metaphor through verse 25 is protective custody, imprisonment to ensure protection of harm. Probably protection from harm, but that's somebody's citation, so I'm quoting it exactly as they wrote it. The purpose of this protective custody is in order to ensure survival until such time as freedom can be obtained. That's through the forgiveness of debts in the Jubilee year. Okay? And we see that in the word picture that comes up in the next verse or two, that using the picture of being under the tutelage of a teacher, where you didn't have rights, but the teacher told you what to do and you had to do it. So in a way, that's protective custody. It's not that you did anything wrong in the sense of protective custody. It's more that keeping all the bad things of the world from infecting you and harming you. This is why you have protective custody. We just went through, by the way, a couple of months of this, okay, where governments tell us we had to stay home and to stay away from work and each other in order to keep us from spreading around a flu, which is in retrospect probably going to turn out to be no much more different than the common flu, common everyday flu. But anyways, there was a tremendous amount of effort there to put us all in protective custody. Okay. And then the commentator here used a word picture reference, a hint as to like the forgiveness of sins during the Jubilee year. On the Jubilee year, all properties went back to their heretical, no T, with D, hereditary owner. Regardless of the condition of any debt that was left to be paid on it. Okay, all debts were forgiven. And in a sense, you have a picture of that then every 50th year of that, on the 50th year, I should say. On that year, you have this picture of the forgiveness of debts. Okay, and it's for those who believe. In this context, Israel and those Gentiles joined to them. Okay, that's to those who believe. Okay, again, faith means to wholeheartedly trust Yehovah, and in conformity with our faith, we are expected to exercise faithfulness to his written law as is, without adding to it or taking away from it. Anything else demonstrates a lack of faith. Okay, a little explanation on that, a little commentary on the commentary. I agree basically with what's said here. Okay, we do exercise our faithfulness to follow what God has written for us in the way of his commandments, because that shows that we trust God to be true. We trust that he is, and that he needs to be taken seriously by doing this. Okay, without adding to it or taking away from it is a true comment, but there needs to be a caveat, because not all tradition is immediately evil. Okay, and realistically, the comment, anything else demonstrates a lack of faith, is a little bit misleading, because I would recommend that anybody who follows any kind of tradition will deny that part of the statement as a complete lack of faith to add anything to what's said. Now I'm treading on really uneasy ground here, but let me explain. Okay, within tradition, we have, tradition does sometimes go too far and contradict the commands of God. We shouldn't be following those. But tradition also gives us a means of performing the commandment of God. Okay, for example, we have the commandment, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Okay, how do we go about remembering that and keep it holy? We can leave it for everybody to develop their own willy-nilly, and every man does that which is right in his own eyes, which you know from the context that's not necessarily a compliment. Um, but there are traditions that are established that can help us give legs to walking out the commandments of God. Not that we're beholding to the commandments, not that, no, sorry, we're holding to the traditions, not that the traditions control us, but it can be a good and helpful guideline. Okay, and I've made this discussion before. It's a tradition to light the candles before sundown on Friday afternoon, before the sun sets. Okay, and the lighting the candle signifies the last piece of work you can do before the work week is over and Sabbath begins. Okay, for me, that's a beautiful tradition because it makes a nice psychological cutoff. The week is over, the Sabbath begins. Okay, and I really like doing that. And if you're not doing it at home in your homes, I recommend you consider trying it to see if it works for you. Okay, and it can be a very beneficial thing. So understand um, that it can be a good thing. Now, if somebody is slavishly doing this tradition and saying, "Oh, we can't do Sabbath because we didn't light the candle," that's not good. That's not a good way approach to it. Okay, you may not feel the same because you're used to lighting a candle, but it's not the end of the world if you don't, because again, it's tradition. It's not commandment. And so we need to know the difference, but understand some traditions may be helpful. And so I'm a little squeamish about anything else demonstrates a lack of faith. Um, it's a little too much of an absolute statement um, for my comfort zone, because there are, and I challenge anybody, especially people who claim that they're non-traditional. I can guarantee you are traditional. It's just that what you consider non-traditional is your tradition. I know it's a funny argument, but we'll talk about that later. Okay. Okay, verse 23. But before faith came, here's where there's a great argument. We were kept under guard by the law, kept for the faith by which would afterward be revealed. Okay. But before came faith, under the law were guarded, having been shut up to the being about faith should be revealed. Okay. That's a real clunky, uh, as word for word as I can find. Um, Hope of Israel did a translation of this. But previously, the conviction that God exists became, under the law, we guarded against anything happening in the future to the promise that was revealed. Okay, maybe that's a little clunky still. Okay. We, that is Israel, and by the way, those Gentiles who joined to them. Remember, Torah says that the Gentile who comes near and joins themselves to Israel will be regarded as one who is native born. This is true today as much as it was then. A Gentile who comes into the Messianic community and wants to become a part and wants to learn is perfectly accepted as a Gentile. Okay? The only thing we ask is that you learn and grow. Okay? That's the only thing we ask. Okay? Many people come to us not being kosher, not understanding why we should even bother, making something special out of the Sabbath. Why all these other high holy days and stuff that's coming up later on this month. Um, what do we have? You know, what do we have this? I'm a Gentile. I have nothing to do with that. Well, actually, now you do. And remember, you are grafted into Israel. That's Romans 11. We're grafted into Israel. Okay. Um, so if we're grafted into Israel, then the high holy days and the commandments of God do matter to you. Okay. But learning that concept, getting comfortable with that concept, and then learning how to do the details of the commandments takes time. It takes some effort. And sometimes it takes some heavy duty reprogramming. And that's okay. You know, in our community, you're free to take your time with that. We don't push anybody. We don't tell anybody you have to be kosher now. The only qualification is when we do a shared meal, we do require that it be kosher, because we don't want to give something that's not proper by biblical commandment. I should be I should be kosher with my definition there. Kosher by biblical commandment is those things which God said is food and not food. Okay, you serve what's food, you don't serve what's not food. Traditional kosher has a much broader set of prohibitions and instructions, and we don't require that, but we do require biblical. Okay, so you're certainly welcome to come, and if anybody, we do have shared meals, and if you want to contribute, we often tell people just start off with bringing vegetables, bringing a salad, something really obviously clean and neat. Nothing with any kind of meat or meat products anywhere near it, just to start with, till you get comfortable and you start to understand the process and what's good and what's not good. As you learn as you go, and it's not unheard of that someone brings something, and we have to politely tell them to take it back out to their car, because it's not right. And yes, we do guard that carefully. Not that we want to be mean about it, but keeping the commandments is the thing. Keeping the traditions, optional, right? Okay, now here we get into some of the more meaty stuff. We're kept under guard by the law. Okay, Rome, uponomos. Okay, guarded under the law. That is my best guess at what it's supposed to mean. Okay, Ephrorome means to guard, to protect by a military guard, either to prevent hostile invasion or to keep the inhabitants of a besieged city from flight. In other words, keeping you locked in, or protecting you from something coming in. Okay, so kept under guard. Okay, upo meaning under, nomos anything established, anything received as usage, a custom, a law, a command. New Testament Greek, it's pretty much meaning law. Now remember, Paul uses some version of the word nomos either as God's commandments or as the Pharisaic rules. Okay. In this case, I think we're dealing with Torah here. Okay. Are we guarded to be kept in or be kept out? Does Torah keep us safe from sin, or does Torah block our access to God? Okay, think protective custody. Okay. Oftentimes, people paint the picture of God's commandments as a fence. Okay, and they paint the picture opposite of what it should be. They put us in the middle. Of course, we always think of ourselves as the middle of God's universe. And then they paint the fence of God's commandments around us to keep us from going anywhere. God does not want us to have fun or to go anywhere or to do anything, and that's usually how it's explained. And I would recommend that there's a different picture. Okay, there is a fence, and that goes in a circle, but you're on the outside of that circle, and you're free to go everywhere outside that fence. And why? Because what's inside the fence is a pit. Okay, a deadly pit. The commandments of God are intended to keep you safe from getting hurt. Okay, that's how I would recommend that you look at the law. Okay, it's a protected device, not a punishment device. Okay, kind of like protective custody. You may not be happily in protective custody, but if you are, chances are it's because it's for an important reason. Okay, this is not people put in jail for committing crimes. This is for people that are kept safe from something adverse happening to them. Okay, the usual interpretation of this verse has Shaul saying that that Jews were imprisoned by the Mosaic law until Christ came, but now are free from it. So eat a ham sandwich. Okay? However, uponomon, used 10 times in the New Testament, and listed for you there, and three times alone in 1 Corinthians 9:20, but only by Shaul, must be understood as a technical term which he coined in order to analyze one aspect of the concept of legalism. See the reasoning developed in Galatians 2:16. This is Dr. Stern's own commentary, and also Romans 3:20, which we did last week. Last week. In connection with the Greek phrase erga nomo, meaning the works of the law. Okay? And then we were kept for the faith. Okay? We were protected from sin to be a holy people, ready for the faithful promise of Yeshua. Okay? We're kept from sin, and we're also pointed to the right direction. Okay? To be a holy people means to do that which is good and right and proper, set aside, literally. Okay. Okay, and now, here comes the fun part. Therefore, the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. So that the law, tutor, our, has been up to Christ, that by faith we might be justified. Englishman's Greek New Testament. Hope of Israel did a translation on this too. Therefore, the law became our teacher on Messiah, that by the promise we would be shown to be right. Okay? Back up again and remind ourselves, which promise are we talking about? Which promise? Did that end up in here? No, I'm not sure. Got a ton of commentary. Which promise? Okay, let me throw that in there. Okay. Lost my place here. Okay. So we're kept for the faithful promise of Yeshua. What was the promise in Galatians? To whom was Paul writing? He was talking to Gentile believers. Gentile believers who were already filled with the Spirit of God and walking in miracles. Okay, for whom Paul said, you don't need to make a conversion to Pharisaism. In modern times, you don't need to make conversion to Orthodoxy to be part of the family of God. You already have the proof that you're part of the family, okay? With the presence of the Spirit and the miracles happening around, okay? So, the promise then, Paul mentions earlier, the promise is that Gentiles are acceptable in the kingdom as Gentiles. That through Abraham, the seed of Abraham, all the nations of the world will be blessed. That blessing is explained here in that we have a place in Messiah Yeshua, through Messiah Yeshua, a place in God's kingdom even as Gentiles. Okay, and always be mindful of the point of that argument is, therefore we don't need Pharisaism. Therefore we don't need orthodoxy to be one with the family of God. We don't need that to be pleasing to God. We already are. Okay? In fact, you set yourself up to fail if you make the conversion. Okay, so we're kept for the faith, for the faithful promise of Yeshua. Verse 24. Therefore the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. Okay, so that the law, tutor, our, has been up to Christ. I think I already went past this, didn't I? I think I backed up and retraced a few things. I thought I was talking about it before. Therefore the law became our teacher in Messiah, that the promise, this is where I got sideways. Okay, the promise we're talking about, the Gentiles will even be blessed to come along with Israel to be part of God's kingdom. Okay, and be part of God's people. Okay, our, us, we, Israel, and those Gentiles who join them. Okay, tutor. Okay, pedagogos, go. Sounds like some music from the 60s. A tutor, literally a guardian, that is a guardian and guide of boys. Among the Greeks and the Romans, the name was applied to trustworthy slaves who were charged with the duty of supervising the life and morals of boys belonging to the better class. The boys were not allowed so much as to step out of the house without them before arriving at the age of manhood. In other words, God has put us under a guardian which had total control over us. Okay, so we were a guardian that had total control over us. Okay, the law protects us and delivers us faith and holy to God. Okay, that's the meaning of the statement. The Torah functioned as a custodian until the Messiah came. This is, I think it's a big quote from Dr. Stern. Yeah. The word translated custodian is pedagogos, literally boy leader. In ancient Greece, a pedagogos was a slave who conducted a boy to and from school. It is therefore not surprising that the King James Version renders the phrase, "The law was our schoolmaster to bring us Jews unto Christ." But although the English word pedagogy is derived from it, the pedagogos had no teaching functions, citation to explain that. And although the Torah had as one of its goals leading Jewish people to the Messiah, as Shaul explicitly says in Romans 10:4, that is not the import of the present verse. The pedagogos actually would have been a harsh disciplinarian, hired to do a job with the boy required to obey him. Thus, the Torah, because it was perverted into legalism, served in the role of harsh disciplinarian for the Jewish people, providing some protection but generally making the Jewish person aware of many transgressions. Also back to last week's study, verse 19, so that we Jews might turn from legalistic rule following and be declared righteous forensically. This is Dr. Stern's definition, on the basis of our trusting and being faithful to Yeshua, whose trusting faithfulness to God the Father purchased our salvation. Okay. Since we're far from the very beginning of the letter, where all the commentary to explain what forensically was all about, to be declared righteous forensically basically is used by Dr. Stern. That's actually saying the way he's doing is saying the same thing twice right there. Forensically, he's using in his commentary in Galatians, talking about it is discovered to be this way. You are discovered to be declared righteous. Okay, in other words, what did you do to get there? Nothing. It was discovered for you that you're to be declared righteous. Okay, that's what he means by forensically. On the basis of our trusting and being faithful to Yeshua, whose trusting faithfulness to God, the Father, purchased our salvation. Okay, our trusting and being faithful to Yeshua is a point. I don't want to argue against that in any way, but I think as Messianics, we need to also add our trusting in being faithful to God's commandments, that what God commanded is trustworthy and faithful to perform. I'd like to add that, just to add to that a little bit. Okay, commentary. Pinchas, Phineas in English, in the name of Rabbi Levi said, the matter may be compared to the case of a king's son who thought he could do what he liked and habitually ate the flesh of nevelah and terafot, types of meat ritually unfit for consumption. Said the king, I will have him always at my own table, and he will abstain from his own free will. Similarly, because Israel were passionate followers of idolatry in Egypt, and used to offer their sacrifices in the forbidden high places, on account of which punishments used to come upon them. The Holy One, blessed be He, said, let them offer their sacrifices to me at all times in the tent of meeting, and thus they will separate themselves from idolatry and be saved from punishment. Hence it is written, what man soever there be of the house of Israel that killeth an ox, and hath not brought it into the door of the tent of meeting, and it continues the citation. But the idea is, this is the purpose of the commandment, is to keep us from committing idolatry and how we kill our food. Okay. All right, verse 23. That's kind of a sidestep, just because it sounded cool to read it. Verse 23. But after faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor. Okay. But having come faith, no longer under a tutor are we. Okay, Englishman's Greek New Testament. And then the promise came. And then the promise came. We are now under a different state of events that began to exist. Again, Hope of Israel's translation of that. We, Israel, and those Gentiles who joined them. Okay, the we in there. Ooh, yeah, what do you mean we? Yes, we are no longer under a tutor. Okay. Okere upo pegadaunan. I'm going to mangle this Greek. No longer under tutelage, the promise has matured, in other words. Okay? Okere, yet still at the time of a thing which went on formerly, whereas now a different state of things exists or has begun to exist, of a thing which continues at present, even now with negatives, no longer, no more, upo, under, and also the tutor. Okay? Does not being under the tutelage mean you can ignore and reject what the tutor has taught? This is an important part of our argument, because people are going to come and say, oh, you see, we're no longer under the tutor of the law, therefore we can check the law. Okay. Does the fact that we're not under the law means the law has no value for it? The picture of the tutor as the disciplinarian, okay, the pedagogue, as the disciplinarian, okay, he whipped you into shape and prepared you for being a man. Now that you become of age, you're free to ignore absolutely everything the tutor taught you, right? And nobody's going to argue with the fact that you behave like a spoiled little 3-year-old again, because you threw away all your lessons in manhood and self-control, right? Because you're no longer under the tutor. You can throw all that stuff out the door now, right? Or is it expected that you take what you've learned from the tutor and apply it to your life from adulthood forward? You follow me on that? You need to learn this argument. You need to learn how to win this argument. Yeah, we're not under the law, but the law is now in us, right? It is now in us. Just like we have been disciplined by our parents into being mature and not self-focused, but considerate of other people, okay? Learning to do the right things because it's the right thing to do, okay? Now that we have the Spirit of God in us, we can do anything we want to do, right? Anything we want to do, and nobody can say anything about that. No, that's not what maturity is all about, okay? Maturity is you maintain the self-control that you learned as a kid. You maintain the direction of where you're going when you were a child, okay? So win this argument, okay? Does not being under the tutelage. Oh, I already said that. Okay. Yeah, I started there and I went off. Okay. Does not being under the tutelage mean you can ignore and reject what the tutor has taught? The purpose of the tutor is to teach and guide for a lifetime of proper skills and behavior, right? What you learned under the tutor still remains true. It's just now you're supposed to do it under self-control, not under the fear of punishment. To teach elimination of the laws, to reject the tutor, and contradicts verse 21. Okay. Also contradicts Deuteronomy, Devarim 5, 28, 29, and also 4, 1 through 9. And Shaul himself in Philippians 3, 5-6, and Acts 23:6. See also Yochanan, couple verses there for a similar idea, and also Matthew, think not that I came to destroy the law and the prophets. I did not come to destroy the law and the prophets, but to fulfill. Okay? Any definition of fulfill which alters, lessens, or eliminates the commandments of God, Yeshua just said in the beginning part of that verse, he didn't come to do that. So any definition of fulfill that lessens or reduces, changes, or eliminates is against what Yeshua just said. Again, that's an argument you can learn to win. Okay? Okay. In this citation, Matthew 5:17 and 19, Yeshua makes Torah permanent. He confirms this is the constitution for a believer. Okay, while the tutelage function of Torah, sin sacrifices, and I put that in a question mark, may be ended in the coming of Messiah, all other functions still apply, even to today. Okay, so in a sense, the tutelage function, we have that argument given to us in Hebrews. Okay, in Hebrews, it makes the argument that in this one point, that there has to be a change in the Torah, that we no longer need to provide for sacrifices of bulls and goats on Yom Kippur for our sins. And the sin sacrifices, which is usually a goat in the other sacrifices, we need not, because we can't go back to that if we already have Messiah. Okay? And so that kind of touches on that same idea. Okay? So, but everything else still applies. There's no contradiction of the rest of it. There's no argument otherwise, and it's kind of interesting. The reason that statement was made is because it was during that time, either just before, during, or after the time that Jerusalem was destroyed and the temple was destroyed. There was no more place to make a sacrifice, and so the argument in Hebrews is, okay, that's destroyed, but it's okay. We have Messiah Yeshua, so we don't need animal sacrifices for our sins. Okay. Holiness is still holiness. The difference is we are expected to be mature and self-controlled in our thoughts and actions rather than enduring enforced behavior. That's my two shekels worth there. Holiness is still holiness. And again, this is how you win the arguments in Galatians. Holiness is still holiness. Okay? God did not eliminate his commandments. Okay? He did make a change, which is our sin sacrifices. But everything else is there for us to do. Okay. And that's it for today. Questions, comments, rebukes? Shalom, Gael. Good to see you. I forgot to mention it before I finished up. If I was smart, I'd do that. If you have any questions, comments, rebukes, and you want me to include it in our discussion in this session, so it's part of our record here, go ahead and put it in now, and we'll deal with it. Otherwise, we're going to start winding down. Thank you for coming out. God bless you guys. Simchat Yeshua Messianic Fellowship. You can find us on our website, simchatyeshua.org. That's SIMCHATYESHUA, all one word, .org. Let's see. Yeah, we're here every Wednesday at 6 o'clock California time for our discussion in Galatians. We're almost halfway through this book, and start thinking forward about what you'd like to do next when we're done with Galatians. Okay. Let's see. We also have a Facebook page, Simchat Yeshua. Again, SIMCHATYESHUA. If you like what you see here, please mark your response as a like. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. hit the bell if you need to be reminded when these studies come online, so you can join in, and be sure to tell other people and spread the word. Make it a happy thing. If you're interested in supporting the congregation or the actions of this channel, you can donate through our website, simchatyeshua.org, and that would be the most advisable way to do it. Okay, any okay, question. No, we're actually meeting over at um, oh, good. I'm blanking. I'm doing a Biden. Nielsen. Her, I remember her last name, but suddenly I can't remember her first name. We're over at her place. If you need directions, get in touch with me. If you have her phone number, you can give her a call. She prepared a lot of food last week just because she wanted to make a big splash. But this coming Shabbat we'll be meeting. It's going to be a shared meal, so bring a little something, okay? And yes, I'm blanking, and I'll remember just as soon as I log off. So, anyways, so give me a call if you have any questions. Um, I can help you find directions or an address at least. Okay, but we were there last week. We checked it out. It was she's got a nice big place. Very comfortable. Definitely much cooler and more comfortable than being at the park. So um, until we have the need to change venue, um, we're gonna be still over at her house. Um, good night. I should have been doing a speech in Wisconsin or something. Um, anyways, okay. Any other questions, comments, or rebukes? And by the way, um, if you know of other people that went to the park last week, Gloria, thank you, Gloria. It's a glorious name. And I don't know why. I just couldn't get there. Thank you, Ruhama. Toda Rabah. You're saving me from my own brain. Okay. Um, if you need an address or directions, um, you can ask her. You can call me. I'll find it. I do have directions somewhere. I just don't remember where I put it. Okay. Um, okay. Anything else? Any other questions, comments, rebukes before we close it all down? All right. If you do, go ahead and type it in. If not, I'm going to go silent for a couple minutes just to make sure that I don't cut off the recording to anybody for whatever the part that's being recorded here. So, shalom, kids. We'll see you. Some of you I'll see you Shabbat. Some of you I'll see you next Wednesday. And God bless you. bless again.